Hello, everybody. Our guest speaker today is Siobhan Curhan. I love her word in the background, dream. Um, I really want you to have a look at the, her, her most. Sorry, I'm just getting into the screen. I read this book when I first got it a couple of days ago, and I'm rereading it because it's so good. I really recommend it to you. It's a wonderful book about so many important things. But you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to Siobhan. So welcome, Siobhan, and take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I thought, as this is the Hatchery Writers uh, writing group talk, it would probably be most useful if I shared what I learnt about writing from writing an American in Paris. So hopefully that will, there'll be some useful tips for anyone working on a novel currently or thinking about writing a novel. So I've come up with eight different key things that I learned from writing this specific novel. And the first one is no writing is ever wasted. So I don't know if any of you have ever written something and it never got anywhere. Maybe you sent it out to publishers, maybe you wrote a shorter piece for magazines or papers and it got rejected, and you probably think, well, that was a waste of time. Well, the first thing I learned from writing An American in Paris was that no writing is ever wasted. And the reason for this is because I got the book deal for An American in Paris directly off of the back of a rejection. So let me explain. My first book was published back in the year 2000. The first four books I had published were all for adults, 3 novels, 1 non-fiction. But then the third novel didn't sell as well as my publisher had hoped, and so I was dropped by the publisher. So back then I thought my writing career was over, but I still had the writing bug. I still loved to write, so I wrote and self-published a novel for young adults, which went on to win an award, which in turn won me a traditional book deal again. And then for the last 10 years, I've been writing books for young adults and children, but I always really, really wanted to write fiction for adults again. That was still my burning dream, as you see. That's why I have the word on my wall, because I think it's so important to keep dreaming and to keep chasing our dreams. So I had the problem I had, though, which I'm sure a lot of you can relate to, is that I could only write this novel for adults around the edges of my paid work, the work I was being paid to do. So I was lucky in that was writing, but it was books for children and young adults. So this novel for adults that I wrote, I had to do around the edges of everything else, the bill paying work, if you like. So as a result, it took me over 3 years. And it was very bitty, it was just, I'm sure, again, a lot of you can probably relate to this, but I would go months without even being able to look at it. And I'd come back to it and it would all be, I'd have to, get to know it all again. And as a result, it never really flowed. The writing never flowed. It felt a bit disjointed. But because I wanted this dream so badly, I just kept plugging away at it. And then I finally had a finished first draft. And if I'm completely honest, I sort of knew. I knew in my heart that it wasn't good enough. But it had taken me 3 years, and I just thought, I can't let this be for nothing. Let's just send it out, see what happens. So that's what I did. And my agent sent it out to publishers for adults. And slowly but surely, one by one, they started coming back to us. And the message was the same from every single one. They were all really nice about my writing. They just weren't sure about this book. The type of feedback I was getting, it's just not quite strong enough, or I don't quite love it enough, or it doesn't really fit neatly into a genre or pigeonhole. We wouldn't be sure where we'd quite place it in the market. So obviously, as these were coming in, I was getting more and more disheartened, and this long-held dream of mine was fading away. And then one publisher got back and they asked if I'd like to meet for a coffee. And so this doesn't happen unless they're interested, So I was all excited, thinking, they're going to offer me a book deal. But then when I met up with the editor, She asked me if I'd ever thought of writing historical fiction. And so I had to think really quickly. I was like, right, okay, that came a bit from out of left field, but she wouldn't be asking unless there was an opportunity here. And so I think, I'm against lying in principle, but I think there are certain situations where it's actually okay to tell a white lie. And this was one of them, because I realized, okay, she wouldn't be asking unless there's an opportunity. The truth is, I had never, ever thought of writing historical fiction before. But I thought at the end of the day, I want to write for adults again. So if this is what it takes, so I said yes. Actually, I've always sort of thought of that as an option. And then she said, well, more specifically, World War II fiction, because that was selling really well at the moment. It was a really strong genre to write for. And at that point, I thought, oh, good, because actually of all the periods in time, like World War II is a period in history that I am genuinely really interested in. My grandparents used to tell me when I was a kid, like all the tales of what it was like during the war for them. And so I've always had that interest, that fascination in that time period. So it's a little bit easier to lie at this point and say, well, actually, yeah, I have sort of contemplated writing a World War II novel in the past. So she asked if I would go away and write a synopsis, come up with an idea for a story. And she said, could it be a dual timeline novel? So with one timeline set during the Second World War, but also a timeline set during the present day, and they're somehow connected. So I went away and did that. And as soon as I started researching the Second World War for ideas, I was just gripped. I thought, oh, this is actually really interesting. Even though I hadn't thought of doing it before, I was so happy that she had asked me, because I found it fascinating. So I came up with an idea, and because she had enjoyed my writing of the novel that we had actually submitted to her so much, she didn't need me to write this book in order to offer me a book deal, because she knew from the first book, even though she didn't think the first book was strong enough in terms of the plot or what it was about, or what kind of pigeonhole they could put it into, she felt confident enough in my writing that she could offer me a book deal on the strength of this synopsis. So that's why my first point is that no writing is ever wasted, because I think this is a good example. You could say, well, I spent 3 years on and off on that novel that got nowhere, but actually it did. It was almost like a calling card, because it was enough for her to say, well, I do like your writing, so how about you just write this instead? So that's how An American in Paris initially came to be. And I like sharing that story, because I think it's good, because I know as a writer, especially when you're starting out, you will encounter a lot of rejection. You will encounter a lot of, oh, I don't quite love it enough, or whatever. And so I wanted to share that with you first, because it's a good example of how nothing is wasted. Everything you write, you're getting better. It's like physical exercise. Every time you go for a run, you get that bit fitter, and it's exactly the same as with writing. So yeah, so that's my first point, hopefully to just reassure you that whatever you're working on, it will never be a waste of time, ever, because if for nothing else, it's helping you hone your craft as a writer. So the second point really comes off the back of that. So my second tip is be prepared to pivot, which is exactly what I did in that meeting. I had to pivot really quickly from writing. I'd written a book that was contemporary fiction, the one that had been rejected, and I had to pivot very quickly into historical fiction. And I know that sometimes, because I've done a lot of writing workshops, I've worked with a lot of writers over the years, and I know that a lot of writers can get very wedded to an idea, about the type of writing they want to do or they ought to be doing. And then if you suggest that they're a bit more business minded about it, some writers can get quite sort of offended at that, and think, well, no, I want to write this, and I mean that's fine. You have to feel passionately about what you're writing, but if you want to get published, publishing ultimately is a business. Ultimately, your book is a product that has to be sold. So I could have been all precious about it, you know, with my book that got rejected and said, no, this is the one I want to write. This is the one I want published. And no one would have published me. But because I was prepared to pivot and I saw an opportunity, I thought, okay, so clearly people are buying a lot more historical fiction. They're buying a lot of books set during World War II. You know, I want to get published. So why not try writing a book in a genre I know will sell well? I mean, it's just good business sense. So, and I have to say, An American in Paris has been out for a month now, and so far it's sold way more copies in its first month than any of my other books have done. You know, so I think that the proof is in the pudding. You know, that you know, it makes sense to, if you want to get published and if you want to sell well. Everyone has different goals, obviously, with writing. So I'm not saying you have to do this, but it's just that, you know, I think if you are seeing it as a serious career move that you want to make full-time sort of salary from, then I do think you have to be prepared to pivot and to be business-minded about your writing. The third tip that I have for you, I've just called research, research, research. And I mean, this is obviously so important for historical fiction because you're writing about a period of time that, you know, you weren't alive during. So obviously you have to research to make it authentic. But I would say whatever you want to write, if you want to write contemporary fiction, equally, you know, you need to research the location that you're going to set your book in. You need to research the type of jobs that your characters are going to do, or, you know, all those kind of details. I think, you know, research, I can't stress highly enough like how important research is, and doing your research before you begin to write, because otherwise the writing process will be such a stop-start experience, because you'll have to keep stopping every page pretty much to check things. And so what I did with An American in Paris is I gave myself a month before I started to write, which was purely for research. And in that month, I just read and read and read. And I watched films set during the Second World War. I watched documentaries. I went down internet rabbit holes, you know, and I knew the time, you know, the specific time period I was setting the novel in, which was the first couple of years of the war. I knew I was going to set it in Paris and in France. So, you know, obviously I honed my research into that. And then what I did, I had a big A4 notebook where I would then just store all of the interesting facts and details that I wanted to use then in the novel. So I kind of saw it a bit like being a magpie. You know how magpies, they're attracted to glittery things that they will take and bring back to their nest. So I saw my research a bit like that, you know, that I would do all of this reading, all of this watching and viewing, and every time I came upon an interesting detail, I would kind of squirrel it away in my notepad. And so, for example, it can be anything from little things like the fact that no one was, there was no coffee available in France during the war. And so people had to drink this horrible kind of chicory substitute. So as a coffee lover, that obviously struck a chord with me. But I thought that was quite a nice little detail, but that maybe not many people would be aware of. Another detail I discovered that really interested me was that women, once the Germans were occupying France, women in France were no longer allowed to wear trousers and they were no longer allowed to smoke. So obviously I thought, okay, these are great details because my main character is this feisty American woman in Paris who would have hated that, you know. So it's kind of like just squirreling away any details you find in your research that you think will be relevant to your characters or will make interesting details or facts. So yeah, and I, like I said, I can't recommend highly enough doing all of that before you start writing, so that then when you begin writing, you can let the story flow and you've got everything you need there in a file or in a notebook or whatever to refer to. So point number 4 that I really learned with this book. Again, I seem to learn this or need to be reminded of this with every novel I write. But it's that you can't possibly know your characters really well right from the start. And that can be frustrating, it can be frightening, you know, when you're starting out and you're like, oh God, I have no clue about this character, just feels really flat and two-dimensional. And I think I've put, you know, for point number 4, getting to know a character is like getting to know a friend. You know, you can't become best friends with someone overnight. It takes time. It takes time spent hanging out with them, basically. So this is what I kind of relearned with this novel, because I know at first I felt like my main character, Florence, I didn't quite have her voice, you know, I didn't quite have her personality, and I was panicking because I was thinking, well, she needs to be a strong character, she needs to be a likable character, but she still felt a bit flat to me. And in the end, I just kept writing, you know, I kept just writing anyway. And I tried not to be afraid, because I think when you're sort of afraid and you're stressing about something, you sort of tend to close up, your imagination closes up. So I just let things flow through, and there were sort of various variations of Florence, if you like, in the first few chapters before I really kind of honed in on who I wanted her to be. And then I just went back to those early chapters and kind of rewrote a bit so that it was consistent. But I wanted to share that with you because I think that is a common thing where, you know, you sort of feel, oh shit, you know, I don't really know who this person is, and I would just say, just don't worry about it. Just keep writing, and if you like, you can do things like write away from the manuscript, but write a monologue from their point of view on a certain subject, just as a little side exercise, you know, to help you really capture the voice and get into the voice of the character. So yeah, so that was another thing that I sort of relearned with this novel. Point number 5 is get rid of distractions in order to go deeper. So I started writing in American in Paris at the very beginning of the first lockdown here in the UK. And so all of a sudden, all distractions were pretty much, you know, torn away. And at first, of course, I was going through, I guess what everyone was going through at the start of the pandemic, you know, worrying about loved ones, worrying about, you know, just what's happening, what's going to happen. And then going into lockdown, obviously, initially was kind of scary and weird. But then I remember, and then on top of it, you know, I was thinking, shit, and I've got a deadline looming, I've got to write this book. And, you know, and then I sort of, this was my way of reframing it, I guess. I just thought, well, okay, look, people sometimes pay thousands of pounds to go on a retreat, to go on a creative retreat or a spiritual retreat or whatever, writing retreat. And here we are being given one for free, essentially, because we've had everything else taken away. So I kind of saw it as an opportunity, really, to just, and to be honest with you, it also kind of, it helped me deal with you know, my fear about what was going on in the outside world by seeing it as, you know, this opportunity to get really deep into my novel and just focus on the novel. But the lesson I learned from that was that I found the writing experience so much more rewarding. I found I wrote so much, it came out so much quicker than normal, you know, because I was able to dedicate this time to it. And in a sense, it was this weird thing where on the one hand, it was really helping me. It was almost therapeutic to just escape into the world of the novel and not have to think about what was going on in the real world. But I think my writing really benefited from that, and certainly I found the process so enjoyable, you know, because I really could get immersed in the book. So I guess the lesson from that really is that obviously we don't want to have, you know, pandemics to help our writing. That's not, you know, it's definitely not a perfect situation, but it's, can you recreate those circumstances, you know? So in thinking just practically in day-to-day living, when you've got, say, a 9-to-5 job and a family, can you carve out, even if it's just one day, like a Sunday or something, or a day off during the week, where you just lock yourself away in your bedroom and you tell your family or whoever you live with that I'm just having a little mini writing retreat, and turn off social media, turn off all distractions, and just see what you can get done in one day. But yeah, that was something that I found really, really benefited the writing. So it's just finding ways of recreating that now for yourself, that it will massively benefit your writing. So my tip number 6 is actually from a quote by the American writer Robert Frost. And the quote is, "No surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader." And so I love this quote because I just feel, it's so true, but it's just such a good thing. And I had it on a post-it while I was writing an American in Paris to remind myself. And so I was about halfway through the book, and I felt like I was happy with how it was going, but I wasn't really, really happy. I just knew there's something it could be better. The plot could be better. And again, another tip I always share in writing workshops is you always have to think of your reader, like what's your reader getting from this page, from this chapter, from the book as a whole? How are they being rewarded? And I felt like my book needed some kind of twist, because I know as a reader, a twist is so rewarding, when it's well done. And so, yeah, so I was thinking, okay, well, going back to the Robert Frost quote, what would surprise me? I had it all mapped out. I knew where it was going, and I thought, what would be a real surprise at this point? What could I change that would give the reader that real kind of feeling of satisfaction, like, oh, I didn't see that coming, and I remember I went for a long walk, probably several times actually, which again, was the only thing we could do during lockdown. So that really helped. I walked up and down the seafront in Hove, time and again, trying to figure out how can I surprise my reader? What can I do? And eventually, I'm not sure how long it took. It probably took about a week or two of just thinking on it. And I came up with an idea. And then I knew, you sort of know in your gut, don't you? Then I thought, okay, now I feel like the plot is strong. Now I feel like I've given the reader, like a good experience, which I wasn't quite feeling before. So yeah, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. I think that's a really good kind of thing to have as a, sort of little North Star to work by. Which leads me on to point number 7, because point number 7 is the second half of that quote from Robert Frost, which is no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. And so towards the end of the novel, there was a scene that I knew I was going to write, which involved the death of, one of the main characters. And I knew, again, thinking from a reader's point of view, I thought, okay, this is a scene where I want the reader to be crying, or at the very least to feel like, moved. And so I knew, going back to the Frost quote, that I had to basically make myself cry when I wrote this scene. And if I didn't make myself cry, then it wasn't good enough. So my son was at home during the lockdown, and so I went through to him and I just said, okay, don't disturb me for the next hour or so, because I've got to write this important scene, and basically I've got to make myself cry, and I'm not coming out of my room until I'm crying. So my son looked at me like I was a complete nutter. It's like, what? And I said, don't ask, but it's okay, it's all good. So I go off into my room, start writing the scene, and sure enough, after about half an hour, my makeup is down on my chin, and I'm bawling. And then I came back to see my son, and I went like mascara running all down, and and he's looking at me like, what the hell? And I did it, and he was like, that's a good thing, right? I was like, yes, it is. And anyhow, so that was that. Finished the first draft, sent it off to my editor, and then there's this nerve-wracking wait. Has the book worked? Will she like it? And finally, I get an email back from her, and the first line of the email said, "As I write this to you, I still have tears streaming down my face." And thankfully, it wasn't because the novel was so bad it brought her to tears, but it was because of that scene. and the impact it had had on her. And subsequently, I've seen several reviews online saying, have the Kleenex handy, and other people messaging me saying that that scene made them cry too. So again, I think Robert Frost, it's just such a great quote, because it's kind of like, ultimately you're the writer, but you're also the first reader, if you like. So if it doesn't make you cry, or if it doesn't, you know, make you laugh in places where it ought to, you want to make the reader laugh, or it doesn't surprise you, if your plot doesn't surprise you, then it won't surprise the reader either. So yeah, I really recommend that as a kind of neat little quote to write by. And then my final tip number 8, is to write from the heart rather than the head. And I think this is something, again, that I have seen a lot when I've been running regular writing workshops and getting to know writers and their work very well, because I'm hearing it on a regular basis. And you can really tell the difference between writers who write from the head and writers who write from the heart. And the main difference is actually the effect it has on you when you're reading it or hearing it read. And I think, again, fear can make you, and stress and worry can make you write from the head, because you're kind of thinking, oh, what, you know, you might be thinking, well, what would a publisher want, or you know, and you're coming from a more analytical point of view, you know, what's in at the moment, what sort of, you know, and all of this kind of thing, and or looking at a common thing that writers do, I know, is look at what's selling well, a specific book that's selling well. So Harry Potter was a great example of this, because after Harry Potter came out, agents and publishers were just deluged with books about wizards. And the thing is, those books about wizards are kind of written more from the head than the heart. As I think with J.K. Rowling, I'm guessing, you know, Harry Potter definitely came from her heart. It was something she passionately wanted to write. Whereas the kind of other writers afterwards were coming more from the head, because they were thinking, oh, well, it worked well for her, so, you know, hopefully it will work the same for me. And so let's just dig into this a little bit, because I'm aware it sounds a bit airy fairy, or right from the heart, you know, but what does that actually mean? For me, that means that, well, this is for me personally, but this has worked really well for me, so I want to sort of share it with you, and hopefully it will work well for you too. So I think it's important to have certain key plot points mapped out, because if you have no idea where the story is going, there's the danger of that it won't work, or you'll write yourself into a dead end, or the whole story will be over in the first few chapters, and then you're, you know, like, oh shit, I've got all these other, you know, the word count's meant to be 80,000 or whatever, and you've written 40,000. So I think it's important to kind of know ultimately where you're going. So in the case of An American in Paris, there were certain key events, because it was a historical novel, there were certain key events that, you know, I wanted to include. So I had that kind of mapped out, a timeline, if you like, of events that were going to impact upon the characters and impact upon the story. But then really, I really, with this book, more than any book I've ever written, and I think this taps back into the fact that I was writing during lockdown when there weren't many distractions. So I was able to get very deep into the characters. But I really just allowed, I can remember sitting down at the laptop every day and just feeling like, okay, just let the story flow through you. Let the characters take over. What would the characters do in this situation? How would they react to this situation? And so, and again, I think if you work in that way, it sort of taps into the surprise element, you know, the no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. If you're writing from the heart, you'll be constantly surprised, and I think that's a really good thing, because it just means the story's a kind of organic thing that almost like you're I've heard other writers talk about this, you know, that the story kind of already exists out there in the ether, and you just become a channel for it, which I know sounds really, really kind of woo-woo and a bit new agey or whatever, but I really do believe that. I feel like when I've sat down at my laptop and I've just kind of got into the zone and I've relaxed and I've just started writing, and and another thing that really helps, you know, when you're doing this, is to remind yourself of what Hemingway famously once said, which was, the first draft of anything is shit. And so I think if you can drum that into your head, that it doesn't matter if you write badly in your first draft, as long as you just feel it flowing through you and you're writing quickly. You'd be amazed at how much better, actually. It's ironic, but by allowing yourself to write badly, I really believe you will write a lot better than you would have done if you're too, if you're overthinking it and kind of, and too sort of analytical about it all. So I hope that helps. I'd love to hear your questions, because I think it's so good to just make these kind of things a bit more interactive, and I want to make it as useful as possible, obviously, for you. So if anything I've said has kind of, if you weren't clear about, or you'd like a bit more detail or more examples of, or if you have any other questions more relating to your own writing, I'd be happy to answer them. So if I hand back to you, Stephen, and then maybe we could
Siobhan, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. It's
Oh,
really
thank you.
useful. Yeah. Um, I need to begin with an apology. This has never happened to me before, but some of you may have noticed some idiots who somehow came in and were doing stupid things. And it took me a while to work out how to remove them, but they have been successfully removed. But I found it angering, so I apologize for that. Those idiots, whoever they are. It's that situation where you'd like to strangle somebody but can't get your hands on them because you don't know how to find them. So yeah, firstly, an apology. But um, I could occupy the next hour asking questions just for myself, but I'll just begin with my one or two, and then that'll give people time. And just a reminder, if you would like to ask the question yourself, you can now unmute yourself and ask the question. If you'd prefer to write your question, then put it into the chat and preface your comment with the word question at the beginning. Um, Walking for inspiration is something is new to me. Is that something that you've just discovered, or is it something you've known for a while? I really like that idea.
It's something I've known for a while, but I wish I'd known for longer, because I've been writing for 20 years now, and it's only been in more recent years. I think I tell you, I think the for me it started when I moved to Lewis, and obviously had the Downs on my doorstep. And there was something about walking on the Downs that I found, so therapeutic. I think all those hills and just looking out at all the space. And that's when I first started to realize, oh, actually, this is a really good, walking is actually really good for your writing. Because, and I think you can specifically go on a writing walk if you like. You can specifically, if you're struggling with a plot point, or you're not sure about something, sort of set that intention before you set out, and kind of, and then as you walk, I don't know, I did hear from someone that walking, there's something about the physical act of walking, because you're going left, right, so it does something to the brain, and it kind of helps the brain to process things. There was a therapist told me that a while ago, and I thought, oh, that makes sense actually, because it does seem to, because I can sit at my desk for hours struggling on something, and then I'll go for a walk, and suddenly the inspiration strikes. Of course, then you have the thing of, unless you remember to bring a phone so you can jot down, because that's been really really frustrating, because I've gone out before and forgotten to take anything to write notes on, and of course the minute I start walking, the ideas start flowing, and I have to actually done things like compose little rhymes in my head to try and remember every idea I get, because I know otherwise I'll have completely forgotten by the time I get home. So yeah, if you're going to do walking for your writing, take something to write notes with and on, otherwise you'll regret it.
Thank you. I love the way that you offer practical advice, and I'll come back to here the exercises and advice in here are really useful. I'm going
Oh,
to indulge myself in one other question, because I can see a few people have unmuted themselves, which I suspect means they'd like a question. I want to talk about vulnerability. You talked about making yourself cry.
mm.
Um, that's difficult. If I find I'm not wasn't born in this country, but I've lived here a long time, and I appreciate the concept of the stiff upper lip.
Mm.
Um, some people might find it difficult to allow themselves to become vulnerable, to be able to produce all that emotion in their writing. Do you have any tips for that?
The tip that comes to mind is perhaps, without wishing to traumatize people, obviously, but I'm just thinking that if for example, you're writing a scene where you want your reader to cry, you know that it's a very sad scene. One thing, if you're not getting that from the actual characters, and you know, if you're, I mean, you don't have to physically cry. I think you just have to feel moved. You know, you have to feel that emotion. And one thing you could try is thinking of something from your past where you experience that emotion. So a very different thing, you know, probably, but something that okay, right, this is a funny example, which is sort of related but a bit different. But when I was a kid, um, if I ever got into, I remember one time I got into trouble at school for having a water fight, and me and my friends who were having the water fight were taken to the head teacher's office, and then we were standing there and the head teacher's like getting really cross with us, and I felt this overwhelming urge to giggle, you know, which would have been the worst thing I could have done because that would have got me in even more trouble. And then I remember thinking, shit, I mustn't laugh, I mustn't laugh, I mustn't laugh. And then I thought, think of something sad, think of something sad. And a great aunt of mine in Ireland had just died of cancer, you know. And so I remember thinking, think about great Aunt Lily dying of cancer. And then like, you know, and I was able to kind of like get rid of the, and so it's sort of the same as that, isn't it? It's kind of like, so, you know, without wishing to, obviously I don't want people to kind of rehash really painful memories or anything, but yeah, I think for any emotion, I mean, if you're writing a scene where your character's getting angry, perhaps remember a time when you were angry, maybe about something very, very different, but the emotion is the same. And then remember, how did that manifest in your body? How did it make you feel? You know, so that you can kind of tap into that and put that into your writing. So I don't know if that helps, but that might be one way, you know, of kind of, because it doesn't really matter what the detail is. What you're trying to do is capture and express the emotion, isn't it, and the feelings. So you can, it's just finding a way of tapping into that feeling so that you can put it into your writing.
Brilliant, thank you. Do we have questions from anybody?
I've got one. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh,
Bridget.
Bridget,
Hi, Bridget.
you can't see me because I've hid myself. But it's really to do. I don't know whether I'm going off the track to do with publishing. Is it best to self-publish a first book or to go down the traditional publishing route?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's the question.
Okay, I would say initially try the traditional route, just simply because with a traditional publisher, they will do so much for you. You know, they'll do all the other stuff, you know, like the cover and the marketing and the publishing and getting it in the shops and all of that stuff, you know, which leaves you free to just do the writing. But I'm also aware, you know, it is very hard to get a traditional book deal initially. And so I think self-publishing is a fantastic option. So I think if you have no joy with traditional, you should definitely not give up. I think at that point you should self-publish your book. And then, because that's what I did, you know, after I got dropped by my first publisher, I self-published my first YA novel. And actually it was a really interesting experience. I actually enjoyed, you know, sort of having to oversee cover design and coming up with the blurb for the back of the cover and learning all about, you know, how to market a book. And you know, and in the end, that book ended up winning me a traditional book deal and sort of, you know, and then everything took off from there. So I think both options are equally good, but I would do it in that order. I would certainly, you know, I'd try traditional routes first. And if you have no joy, then self-publish. And then, you know, if you succeed, then self-publishing, what will happen is you'll have traditional publishers come calling like they did with me.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
That's okay. You're welcome. Good luck.
Yeah, I'll add that last year was the 100th anniversary of the publication of a very famous self-published novel. It was called Ulysses. Some of you may.
Oh yeah, exactly.
We have a question from. Sorry, I've got to scroll down. I saw a question. Yeah, question from Pat. Pat, would you like to ask the question, or shall I ask for you? I think you'll need to unmute yourself. I can see you talking, Pat, but no sound. I'll ask the question for you, shall I? Pat is asking, do you read your work in progress to somebody, to someone?
No, I don't. I think just because it can get a little, I mean, you know, I'm not saying you shouldn't, this is just a personal preference, but and actually this has been true for me ever since I started out. I remember my first novel, I didn't show that to anybody. I think because I was too scared. I realized that my confidence was so low in myself as a writer that if one person said something that could be construed in a negative way, I'd probably give up, you know, I wouldn't bother, you know. So I think we're all different in that regard. This is just my personal thing. But I think you have to be careful about sharing your work before you send it to publishers. And I think a well-run writing group, something like Hatchery, is great because, and when I've run writing groups in the past, I'm very, very careful because, you know, when you're sort of overseeing that kind of workshop scenario, because I think sometimes you will get, you know, you'll read your work to people, and sometimes you do get people coming along to a writing group, and when they're giving feedback, it's more about them than the writer who's just read, if that makes sense. You know, that the person giving feedback is using it as an opportunity to kind of show that they know their stuff or whatever. And then also at the end of the day, everyone has different tastes in reading and writing. So I think when I used to host writing workshops, I was very careful to nip anything in the bud that would, you know, the last thing I wanted was a writer, you know, traipsing out, giving up on their hopes and dreams after coming to a session. So I think I would say if you're thinking about sharing your work, just be careful who you share it with, and you will know, because you know your circle of friends or people that you know the people who will be able to give you honest, constructive feedback without destroying your confidence or whatever. But personally, I don't, because I just, you know, that's just a personal preference. But I think it can be very useful when you're starting out, particularly to get feedback. But I would sort of recommend, and also get feedback from someone who knows the genre you're writing for as well. Because, you know, if you're writing, I don't know, some kind of like Mills and Boon or whatever, there's no point really giving that to someone who loves sci-fi, because, you know, they're not going to like even the most well-written Mills and Boon. They probably won't like, or they won't understand what the genre, what the readers of Mills and Boon love. So it's just being careful. That's I would say definitely it can be very helpful, but just be careful who you choose to share it with.
Yes, good advice. Do we have any other questions?
Maggie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. No, I was just fascinated by your title and how you managed to get hold of it, because it is a musical, a film. It's like written about, talked about. It's online. It's on YouTube. How were you able to use that title, and why did you do that?
Okay, I'm really glad you asked that, because I didn't choose that title. And I think that's something that maybe people don't realize, that very, very often publishers will choose the title for books, even though so I had a title for it, but the publisher I'm with are called Book Couture, and they're very, very, like, they are fantastic at marketing, and they're very forward thinking. They put a lot of effort into market research and testing things out before it goes to market, which other publishers that I've been with don't do at all. And so they experimented with several different titles before the book was published. And so the thing about titles is there's no copyright on a title. So it didn't matter that it's the title of a musical or a film already. So that you don't get into trouble if you use a title that's been used before. That's completely legal. And so, yeah, and I think, so they, and I was more than happy to kind of take a back seat on that kind of thing, because I feel like that's their area of expertise, and at the end of the day, An American in Paris, it kind of does what it says on the tin. It is about an American in Paris, and I guess they were probably thinking, oh, it will tap into the fact that it's a familiar title, and so that was probably the thinking behind it as well. But I'm glad you asked that, because actually I think it's quite interesting for people to find out that very often writers don't have a say in the title of their books.
Really interesting. Thank you. Yay.
Great. Any more? Yeah, Ruth, please.
Hi, Siobhan.
Hi, Ruth.
Hiya. I was just going to ask if you set yourself a word count for the day, because I'm going to try and do the next book quite quickly,
Right.
Taking advantage of the lockdown situation. And I wondered if it kind of helped or was a hindrance. Setting a figure.
Yes, I find it really helps, because I often have to write books to quite a short deadline, and so what I will do is I'll break it down. So for example, if I've got to write 60,000 words in 3 months, then that's quite easy maths. It's 20,000 words a month. Then I'll break that down per week, so that's, say, 5,000 words per week. And then, I'll have my diary, and I literally I'll give myself a daily word count, which kind of sounds a bit of a sort of maybe a bit of an anal way to work. And, but I think when you have to get something done quickly or by a certain time, it just makes sense, because otherwise what you get is, you leave it and put it off. So, for example, that example, so where it was like, so if I broke it down over 3 months, it worked out at 5,000 words a week. That to me is really doable. And if you break that down even further per day or whatever, that's 1,000 words per day, working Monday to Friday. That doesn't scare me, that prospect. That seems completely doable. But if you leave it a month, and then you've only got 2 months to write 60,000 words, then of course you're panicking, you're having to write a lot faster and not put as much thought into it. So yeah, I would say definitely give yourself a word target and break it down per month, per week, and then in each week allocate time, certain days of the week. Okay, on Monday I'm going to write 2,000 words, on Wednesday 1,000, whatever, fit it around your other obligations. But that works really, really well for me, and it really helps keep me sane.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Siobhan, do you write every day?
Yes, I do. Well, I mean, I sort of Monday to Friday. I treat, it is my full-time job, so I try to work those kind of hours, like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday or whatever. I mean, obviously you can be flexible, and sometimes I need to work Saturday as well. But yeah, that's that's kind of the pattern.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is great. More questions?
It's me again, sorry, Bridget. Do you do it all on the computer, or do you do you do it on Word and
I do, yeah, I do. When I start working on the actual book, that's all on Word, in one Word doc. But before all the research, I found actually I quite like doing the planning sort of the old-fashioned way. So the very first thing I do usually is a kind of like mind map thing, like I get a big sheet of, is A5, is that the biggest, or the bigger, is A5 bigger than A4? Yeah. So I get A5 sheets of paper, you can buy these big sketch pads. So I get one of them, and then the very, very first thing I will do is literally like a sort of mind map. So, I might have the character's name in the middle, and then little bubbles coming off it, like different details, plot points, whatever, or other characters that she or he knows. And that's how it begins. I cut pictures out of magazines of people who I think look how I picture the character to look. So the first stage is I really enjoy, actually, because it feels, it's not on the computer at all. And then I handwrite my research notes and ideas. I always have a notebook, and I have one note, a specific notebook allocated to that novel where I put everything. So it's a mixture of both for me, but I really like getting down on the floor and spreading ideas out on the floor, and just and cutting pictures out. One thing I will say, and I know I've shared this before, so forgive me if some of you might have heard me say this in previous talk, but I remember one time I was writing something that had quite a big cast of characters, and so I'd cut lots of pictures of, and it was young adults, so lots of pictures of young adults out from magazines, and I had fitted wardrobes in the bedroom where I was living at that point, and it was great. They made a really good kind of like notice board, so sticking all these pictures of young adults up on there all over this wall in the end, and then one day the radiator in my bedroom started to leak, so I got a plumber to come and fix it. And I remember he walked into the room, took one look at this wall of photos, and then the look on his face was just like, and then I realised, because to me it looked like this sort of creative, wonderful wall of inspiration. But whenever you watch a movie about a psycho killer or a stalker or whatever, they've always got, haven't they? When the cops come to finally arrest them, you've got this wall covered in pictures of their victims. So yeah, just be careful where you put your pictures if you do that. But, so that's what I'd advise, like a mix of both.
Right, thank you.
That was a very productive question, Bridget. Thank you. Could I ask a question about characters? You use the analogy of there being like friends or becoming friends. Do you ever fall out with your friends?
Yes, yeah, sometimes, yeah, definitely. I feel, yeah, sometimes I'll have, actually, this is a bit of a boring friend, because I'm writing them. And I think, again, it's just because I haven't got to know them well enough yet. There's a character in An American in Paris called Bessie, who is Florence, one of the main character's best friends. And initially, I didn't give her that much thought. I mean, this is a common thing, isn't it? Because we focus in at first when we're writing on our main characters and we get to know them really well. But then sometimes the secondary characters can just be a bit kind of like two-dimensional because we haven't really thought them through. And at first, Bessie was just this kind of like foil for Florence, and I hadn't really given her much thought. So yeah, I get, to go back to your question, I think I was getting a little bit bored of Bessie. And but I think it's just a good thing to be on the lookout for. If there's a character that you're not particularly enjoying writing, that when they come into the book, then you definitely need to address that, because the reader won't enjoy reading about them, that's for sure. And so I just gave Bessie a bit more thought, and I went away and I was like, hang on a minute, right, who would this person be? What would she be like? And just put much more effort into her. And then actually she became one of my most fun characters to write, even though she was a secondary character. I really did enjoy it when she popped in. And a couple of people have said to me she was one of their favourite characters in the novel. So I think it's a good question and a good thing to be on the lookout for. If you feel like you're falling out with a character, or you're going off them, or if it were a relationship you've been thinking of ending it, then definitely you need to do something to just kind of reinvigorate it.
I'm keeping an eye on the time. We've probably got maybe time for one, maybe two more questions. I'm told part of the etiquette is to keep start and finish on time. Christine, did you want to ask? Yeah, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. I wanted to ask, and thank you for your tips. I think they're very, very encouraging and really useful. I wanted to ask you briefly, if we can, about structure, particularly the balance between writing in a sort of chronological order and using flashbacks.
Right.
Because I find I put in far too many flashbacks, and then I've got flashbacks within flashbacks, and it all gets
yeah. So when you put flashbacks in, are you flashing back a long time? Is it kind of, are you going back to you know, sort of much earlier in the character's story?
Yeah, it's sort of giving background to the character. And,
Right.
and fleshing out the character with flashbacks, I think.
Right, got it. Yeah. I think it's a tricky one because, like you said, then you can, you know, end up going down this thing where, yeah, you get flashbacks within flashbacks, and you're spending more time in the past. I mean, you know, something I often say when I'm teaching writing, and this again, it's just a personal preference, but it has served me really well. I always think of my novels as film, you know, so when I'm writing them, I'm picturing it in my head as a movie, and I'm thinking, where would the director cut to next? You know, where would this scene end if this were a film, and where would they go to next? And so you can sort of apply that to the flashback as well, because obviously flashbacks are something that are used a lot in film, but not too much, you know, and so and not for too long. I think that's another thing, because if you spend too long in a flashback, the reader can, you know, gets sort of so absorbed with that time, and then you kind of jolt them back to. So I mean, it's hard to give advice without actually seeing the manuscript, you know, because sometimes a more lengthy flashback is needed and is powerful and does work. So it is hard to kind of be more general about it, but I think, yeah, maybe just seeing it like a movie, and how long would the flashback last. But my instinct is to say that, you know, kind of less is more, and to not spend too much time flashing back if you can, if that makes sense. But I think it would, you know, every manuscript is different, and it's probably something that I'd have to see the manuscript to be able to advise you, you know, kind of further on that, you know, what could be trimmed or whatever.
Brilliant. Another great question. Maybe one more. Anybody really need to ask that question?
One more.
Yeah, Maggie.
Yeah. Just about, how do you know when it's finished? How do you feel? I must stop tinkering now. No, I can't. If I reread that, I'll change that, and I'll change that. Oh no! And then if I change that, I'll have to do. You know, it's like you change a little bit, and there's a lot that needs changing. And how do you stop yourself?
Yes, thank you for asking that, because I think, again, that's a real, it's a common issue, isn't it? Because you can just, and then there's the real danger that you pick it apart so much it loses its essence, you know. And I've worked as an editor for years, and I know when I was commissioning writers, you know, for publishers, and I'd read through the so-called slush pile, or whatever you want to call it, you know, the submissions pile. And for me personally, I'm confident in saying this, I would say for every editor, that you would take a rough diamond any day over something that has been, you can tell, and you know, so often, you know, I would look at manuscripts, and grammatically they'd be perfect, structurally they'd be you know, everything was in the right place, and kind of, you know, clearly this writer had done writing courses and kind of knew where to put the commas and the punctuation and all of that stuff. But there was something missing, and I think it goes back to that point about writing from the heart rather than the head, you know. And so I'd read it, and I think, yeah, that was good, that was okay. But then every so often you'd get something come in, and I'd always refer to them as a rough diamond, you know, because they'd be rough around the edges, the comma would be in the wrong place, there were things definitely needed fixing about it, but in terms of the voice and the energy, you know, there was a real kind of like just such a wonderful energy about the book, and so I guess what my answer is don't over tinker, and it's being able to discern between, like, you know, when I started my talk and I told you about the novel that got rejected by everybody, and I knew in my heart that it wasn't good enough. I knew it wasn't ready to go out and knew it needed more work. But I kind of just pushed it out there anyway because I couldn't wait, and it'd taken 3.5 years, you know, and I couldn't wait any longer. And then I think An American in Paris, on the other hand, I wrote in 2.5 months, just of solid writing in the zone, no distractions, and the difference was, you know, I wrote that way more from the heart, and so that actually didn't really need much tweaking or editing at all. You know, when I got the structural edit notes back, it was minimal, you know. So I think that's quite a good example, because then on one hand, I've got something I've labored over and, you know, for 3.5 years, something I just like poured out in 2.5 months, ended up being far stronger. So I know it's difficult. It's really hard to tell, isn't it? But I think it's like listening to your gut. If your gut is telling you, no, this isn't there yet, this isn't right yet, then definitely listen to that voice. But if it's coming from a more fearful place, if you know you've put a lot of work into it, you know, you've done the best job you can do, but your fearful voice is saying, oh, but I'm sure you could probably do this better or do that. That's the difference, isn't it? I think it's coming from your gut or your head, you know, your kind of like more fearful voice, and ignore the fearful voice, but always listen to your gut. That's my advice on that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thanks.
That was a great question, Maggie, and probably an appropriate one on which to finish. So thank you all for coming, but especially thank you, Siobhan. That was a
thank you so much.
program.
Great.
Thank you. And I'll stop the recording now, and we will. It'll be available in a couple of days on the Hatchery website.
Can I just say something, actually, because I do, like I said, I do work as an editor. So if anyone watching this wants any editorial feedback on their, you know, on their work, you can find out more details on the website. But I know I've already edited a couple of the Hatchery writers' novels, which I've loved. So yeah, you know, if you want more detailed, specific feedback or advice from me on your work in progress, then please do drop me a line. I'd love to help.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you very much, Siobhan.
Thank you.